the SVLG Annual Forum panel segment, The Sustainability Moment, is brought to you by PG&E. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Tim McRae, and it's my privilege to introduce the next panel discussion. Over the next 40 minutes, you'll hear from a group of leaders working to make sure their businesses are at the forefront of the sustainability movement. Don't forget to text your questions for the Q&A portion to the number on the screen. Our first panelist, Pasquale Romano, is the president and CEO of ChargePoint. ChargePoint is the largest online network of independently owned EV charging stations, of which they own and operate hundreds of thousands of them. Joining him is Rao Mulpiri, CEO of View. As one of the leading companies designing and manufacturing smart glass, View helps homes and businesses cut down on energy costs and consumption. Rounding out the panel is Papia Gambelin, Managing Director of State and Local Government Affairs at United Airlines. In her role, she helps one of the world's largest airline companies reach its ambitious sustainability goals, which includes aiming to be 100% green by 2050. Moderating our panel is Laura Wilkinson, SVP and Head of Communications for the Leadership Group. Over her career, she's managed communications for politicians, leading policy think tanks, and Fortune 500 companies. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thanks so much, Tim, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. So let's get right to it. It's 2022. We know the impacts of climate change have already arrived, certainly here in California. We've unfortunately become all too familiar with the headlines of climate disasters, but there's also good news. In the last 12 months, we've seen passage of transformative legislation in Washington, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and the CHIPS Act, all against a backdrop of private sector innovation that's been at the forefront of climate action for more than a decade, harnessing the power of low carbon and zero emissions technology solutions to create new markets and a new economic dynamism. In short, this is our sustainability moment this year, with the potential to drive the future of an entire generation, which is why I'm so glad to have this panel with us this afternoon. We'll be hearing from leaders in aviation, charging infrastructure, and smart buildings who can really help us understand what we have in front of us in terms of this tremendous market opportunity and the role that policy and regulatory frameworks can play in ensuring that we continue to build on this momentum. So let's get to it. Pasquale, we'll start with you. At ChargePoint, you're at the forefront of a transformation in the transportation sector, which we know has been historically a big part of the problem, but it's really exciting to see the transformation around electrification. We're seeing tremendous amounts of EVs hitting the road, new, used fleets. We know that the demand is hot. We also know that there's a rollout right now of a charging infrastructure nationwide. So help us think through how do we make sure that this is all happening in the right cadence, and how do we think about the role that the private sector is playing, sort of juxtaposed against these billions of infrastructure dollars that are coming from the federal government to invest in the infrastructure and also to spur adoption with the vehicle tax credit?
Wow, a lot to unpack. How many hours do we have? So first of all, thanks for having us. We've been doing this for 15 years at ChargePoint, so it's been a labor of love for a long time. But I think, as you said, it's starting to come. It's top of mind now for everybody, which is great, because that's the biggest start is realization and awareness and conversation. And I think one of the most important things that overarches everything that you asked is that from a private sector perspective, transportation fueling, which is what we're in, has to be carried by the private sector because it's too expensive a burden for any number of governments to do. And also, there's a vibrancy in terms of connecting charging infrastructure with the businesses that have parking lots where people are trying to use the charging, because every consumer or fleet driver is a customer or an employee of that business that has the chargers on their parking lot. So what's key there, I think, first of all, is to make sure that any business models that are out there are pressure tested for long-term standalone viability. Because the last thing you want to do is have what now looks like a large amount of money coming in from the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Bill and other state and local, sort of California's, has led the way for years on state programs. And what that can do, if you're not careful, it can mask fragility. Solar went through this, right? You get some policy changes that can happen abruptly, funding changes that can happen abruptly, and suddenly business models that look like they were going to work don't work anymore. And so you can't have that with fueling transportation. And so what we've been very mindful of over 15 years is, first of all, how do we get businesses to individually embrace it? Headline is ChargePoint. You may think we own chargers and sell power. We don't own a single charger that you see with a ChargePoint label on it. The businesses that have those parking lots out there pay us for that equipment, pay us to maintain it, and also pay us an annual subscription to keep it on our network. The reason that's pretty sustainable is each business essentially is it's like we're crowdfunding all the infrastructure necessary for our business and for the portion of it that our business serves to fuel all these vehicles on the passenger car and fleet side. If to make the business pencil, I needed those things when they ran out, or when the magnitude of the transportation problem, where early, slightly greater than 1% penetration basically in the U.S. fleet at large of vehicles, when that gets to 5, 10, 15%, the amount of funding that's sitting in the infrastructure bill and Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, is going to pale in comparison to the need. And so we don't want to cantilever out on a whole bunch of dependencies that suddenly can't sustain that infrastructure. So our view is the retail and convenience sector has to embrace it, just like they have gasoline for long haul driving. Now, you're not going to go to something that looks like a gas station to charge your car anymore when you own an electric vehicle, because electricity is everywhere. So that means it's going to be at home, it's going to be at your apartment and condominiums. Headline, there's a lot of work being done there to make sure that people that live in apartments and condominiums can have access to charging. And then you've got workplace, then you've got public and private parking, cities and towns, long haul, all the fleet segments, et cetera. And if in totality, in all these different verticals, you can come up with a model that excites the business and that pencils for companies like us and the business, and it doesn't have to pencil from a direct profit on power. It could pencil on some secondary monetization thing, whatever. Life has more imagination than we do. Then what you wind up with is a vibrant, healthy, diffuse fueling infrastructure, and you want it diffuse because you can't wipe it out with one policy change, one business decides to change direction, et cetera. So you don't want the vulnerability.
Right. So I've heard you say it's sort of thinking about it both from a 20-year horizon, but also about making sure that when you think about that charging infrastructure, it's about sort of just skating ahead of the puck a little bit, right? So it's making sure that you're addressing those concerns around so-called range anxiety, or making sure that you're charging the vehicles that are here today and anticipating kind of what's coming.
Yeah, what's interesting is there really isn't a range anxiety. It's something that is something. It's like an echo from the past that doesn't really exist anymore. There's more demand than there is supply for vehicles, both in fleet and passenger cars. That's going to persist for a very long time. And what's a corollary to that, and what you and I talked about in prep for this was, it's a shame that we're waking up so late to the climate problems that we have now. If we had started earlier, we'd be done by now, but we didn't start early enough. But that doesn't mean that because now we have the sheer political will and the will of the population on the planet to fix this, that we can do it in 5 years. Because there just isn't the production capacity, and there won't be, to manufacture enough vehicles. We sell, call it 15 million vehicles a year in the United States to consumers. If you went to every auto OEM in the world, and you said, I want you to put in 10x the production capacity you have now so we can convince all consumers to go out and just swap their car out at their next available purchase, so within 5 years this is all over, they would laugh at you. They would be like, wait a minute, okay, so you want me to have 10x the factories, 10x the union employees, 10x the supply chain commitments, and then when it's all said and done in 5 years, I go back to normal replacement cycle, or no. Right. Okay, more importantly, it would take so long, right. It would take so much capital, it was just impractical. So we're stuck with a 20-year cycle, and I don't like it. No one likes it, but we're stuck with a 20-year cycle. And so putting in all the charging infrastructure for a point in time that's 20 years from now, that's craziness. You just wouldn't do that because all the businesses would be like, well, where's all the use? There's no utilization. Why did I do this? And then you would have things falling into disrepair, and you would have a tremendous amount of stranded assets, I think. So this has just got to build along with the penetration of vehicles.
Great, thanks. Rao, I think speaking about another sort of industry that has really been kind of overlooked or hasn't been, that is still also in this transition is sort of buildings and sort of dumb buildings and the transition to smart buildings. You run a smart a smart window company. We know that the Inflation Reduction Act includes a 30 to 50% tax credit for energy saving smart windows. How is that really helping to catalyze these more efficient workplaces? And help us understand what is that market opportunity as companies are looking at sort of thinking about adopting low emission standards for their buildings as part of this triple bottom line mentality?
Yeah, that is a couple of good questions. But before I jump in, how many of you have experienced a smart window? Look at that, 2. And one works for View and the other is a close friend of mine. So, my grandfather told me a story growing up. He had a BA in the old British India. And he told me a story about and this just sparked when only 2 people raised your hands. There's a British shoe company called Bata. Shiva, you grew up with it. And we all had Bata shoes growing up in India. And the story was the British Bata shoe company sent 2 executives to Africa and said, go study the African shoe market. The first executive came back and said, no one wears shoes. There's no market for Bata. So you can imagine the second executive came back and said, no one wears shoes. There's a tremendous market opportunity for it. So I see market opportunity everywhere. Call me an optimist or an entrepreneur or a Silicon Valley crazy person. So as to View is also actually a 15-year company. So these are long journeys when you touch infrastructure. I got into this in 2008. Shiva was a little bit ahead of me building solar at the time, and now he's making disk drives and memory. But it takes a long time to build these businesses. It takes a long time to build the basic technology, then the infrastructure, and then scale it. And we've been at it for a long time. A lot of technology. We're now about 1,400 patents and growing. So it's deep tech, full stack. So what's a smart window, since most of you have not experienced it? It's a window the way it should be. So if you think about your day-to-day window in your home or office or at the airport, it's only there for bringing light and giving you views. So what a smart window does is it controls glare and heat. You eliminate blinds and shades, those things that nobody likes. And by the way, the blinds are the only product that I have ever known about that are named after a known human handicap. That's how dumb they are. Think about that. You can't think of another product that's named like that, but yet we consume it. And it brings you natural light and views all the time. And the benefit of that is obviously sustainable. That's why I'm on this panel. We save about 20% of the energy compared to all other alternatives if you're building a new building. It saves about 30% of the building energy if you're retrofitting them into an old building with single pane windows or something like that. Importantly, it reduces the peak load, that very expensive, dirty peak power that we have to bring on just for those few hours in the summer on the hottest day because we all want to run our air conditioners. That's precisely when it reduces the load. So it has massive societal benefits. Secondly, it's highly experiential. The notion of UX is kind of native to us in tech, but UX is non-existent in buildings. People build buildings like monuments. Even our homes, people describe them as monuments. And they had vestiges all the way back to pyramids and Taj Mahal, and architects still describe them as monuments. Cityscapes are described that way. But the user is completely forgotten. And it's actually an industry where the gap between the buyer and the user is vast, right? The person that decides on the design is rarely the user, and certainly that poor user never gets to choose the window. In most buildings, airports, commercial buildings, hospitals, even in our homes. So UX is something we're working on. And then the third one is health. One of the biggest benefits of a smart window is you have lower eye strain, lower headaches, lower depression, better sleep because our circadian rhythm is better adjusted. So there's like these multi-pronged benefits of having a smart window. Many of them have been known, not many of them have been brought to the forefront, but the fundamental reason these are not everywhere is, technology is hard. It's similar to electric cars. I don't know if you know, but electric cars are a 150-year-old technology. In fact, in the year 1900, there were more electric cars than internal combustion engine cars on the road. But it's not until recently that you've been able to scale it up. Similarly, smart window technology has been around for 60 years. The early patents go back to the 60s. It's not until we came around that we found a way to find the right material system that's durable, that scales, that's pleasant to the eye, and of course, that's affordable. So to answer your question on the Inflation Reduction Act, we're one of those companies in clean tech or broadly in the energy infrastructure that has built itself over the last 15 years. $2 billion of private investment has gone into our company with no incentives, right? It's not like solar or wind or biofuels. We've been kind of lonely in this journey. And we've been discussing and educating the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, the White House, and then of course the legislature. And recently now the smart windows are included. What we did in this is we've commercially built the value proposition for the window based on the benefits I mentioned. We eliminate blinds, so that saves some money. We reduce energy, so that saves some money. But importantly, we've been selling it as kind of a premium product that enables better health, better productivity. And as a result, we're at Google, we're at Amazon, we're at Microsoft, we're at Regeneron, we're at all the big tech companies and their campuses, and now we're doing big airports. So while you thought you didn't experience it, okay? Let me ask you, how many of you have flown out of SFO Terminal 1, not United, in the last 2 years? Okay, you've experienced the smart window. That entire terminal is smart windows, except it's hidden. You won't know it. You'll just know that it was comfortable. It's kind of like air conditioning. You don't even notice it when it's working well. So Terminal 1 has it, soon Terminal 3.
Yes.
Okay. So the Inflation Reduction Act, what they basically did, Congress put us into the same tax credit as what's currently available for solar, because DOE actually wrote a white paper and that said the smart windows produce negawatts with an N compared to megawatts with an M for solar panels, and that it has dollar to dollar same benefit as a solar panel. So as a result, we qualify for a base 30% tax credit, for the energy credit. We have a 10% incremental credit for a domestic manufacturing credit because we are a domestic manufacturer. And then there's another 10% if you're in the energy community or you build on a brownfield site. So if somebody got rid of a gas station and they built an apartment complex there, they get up to 50% of the credit. As a result, at the 40% level, the entire premium of the smart window goes away, and the cost of the smart window is now same as a dumb window, okay? And you no longer need to use blinds. So think about that. To your question on offices and corporate campuses, obviously everyone wants to build the most experiential office. Everyone's trying every which way to bring their employees back to work. All of us have that same challenge. And so having an experiential office, having an office that's sustainable, and especially a place where your employees can come and be healthier than they would be at home, that's a plus. So a lot of corporate campuses we're doing that are both owned by companies as well as build-to-suits and by extension, the spec buildings that developers build. That sector is a little bit slower right now, as you know, but the multifamily sector is growing for us quite rapidly. So, I mean, every window should be smart, and a window that saves energy, makes you healthy, makes you feel better. Why wouldn't you do it if it costs the same money?
Thank you. And want to make sure that we Papia, hear from you. As Rao was just saying, obviously you're with United, and the aviation industry is also going through a massive transformation. We know that the UN agency, the ICAO, has set a goal of net zero emissions by 2050. Your company has set a goal as well for 100% by 2050. The company has also recently purchased a number of electric air taxis. And so now, we're seeing this transition. But we know that, transatlantic electric air is some way off to try to pencil it out. Help us understand kind of where we are with the market and what United is doing.
Thank you. So, as you mentioned, trying to reach that goal of net zero emissions, we want to reach half that goal by 2035 and then 2050. It's really about investments and short-term investments, long-term investments. And we have a subsidiary within United Ventures. It's a fund, and we invest in startups. So that's really the way that we've strategized around finding those technologies that are going to really help the aviation industry and advance United's agenda. So what kind of advances are we looking at? Those air taxis, you're right, they have a 60-mile radius to be able to travel 150 miles per hour. Those particular air taxis are projected to provide 50% emission reductions compared to a traditional vehicle. So, that sort of technology, all the way to what we're looking at is sustainable aviation fuel. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's really the key, is identifying a variety of different technologies, hydrogen engines, boom supersonic, where you're going to be able to fly from SFO to Tokyo in less than 6 hours, and it'll operate on sustainable aviation fuel. I would be remiss to mention that these technologies that we are investing in, really United will benefit, but it'll change the way the industry is operating today. And United really wants to be a leader in that space.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got about 5 more minutes for our prepared questions, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. So we'll try to do a little bit of a popcorn lightning round here. So you mentioned briefly, Pasquale, about sort of the sheer number of cars, EVs, that are coming on the road. Are we ready? Are we, help us understand can we be ready for the vehicles that are coming? We know here in California, Governor Newsom has set the goal of, stopping the sale of gas-powered vehicles in 2030.
Yep.
We're less than 10 years out for that. I know you've talked about this as sort of a 20-year transformation. Where are we, and are we ready?
Yeah, so the bans that you see, I think it's 2035. So I'm a big fan of the ban on ICE sales, but the thing that most people miss in that is, given if you take 15-ish million cars in the US that are sold a year and you divide it into 280 million, you get a number around 19 years, and that's if 100% of cars sold tomorrow were electric. So there's a long tail. I think in the later years, post 2030, or as you approach 2035, you start to get a residual value squeeze on existing ICE vehicles. So unless there's an application that really demands it, you'll start to see some early exits as you're glide slipping into 2035 and beyond. And right now we're at a point where not 100% of new car sales we're pretty far away from 100% of new car sales. So that's kind of how it'll shape. But the head fake is when we get to 100% of new car sales, we're far away from 100% of cars on the road being electric. Right. So to give you are we ready? Our growth rate has been in the 20 to 30% range quarter over quarter for a while, and we don't see that ending. Okay, so if you're growing at that rate and you're a charging infrastructure company and our market share's holding, so if you're growing at that rate and you're able to keep up from a supply chain perspective on the hardware side and on the software side scale at which we have been, we think that the charging infrastructure can keep up. What I'm personally concerned with is less can we keep up and can the auto industry keep up? What I start worrying about are critical supply chain elements on the auto side. So I'm worried about the metals involved in making batteries. Most are plentiful in the Earth's crust, aside from a few. But we're not, we need to be really mindful of how long it takes to develop capacity and raw materials. Now that's a conversation for the auto industry and such. It's being talked about a lot, but I think that's important. And then I think we have some really interesting challenges labor-wise, a happy problem. You can't put charging infrastructure in, you can't put Rao's products in, you can't put a lot of products in without distributed labor. I can't fly someone from Miami to put in a window or a charger in Seattle.
I can though.
You can. Actually, wait a
I
minute.
can take that care
Wait a
of
minute,
it.
we can.
Got you covered.
Okay, I didn't realize this. We have the solution right here. You heard it first. We're going to air taxi the labor.
At supersonic speeds.
At supersonic
right.
speeds. By the way, please, I know you're going to fly out of San Francisco, but can you put some boom flights out of San Jose for us poor people down here?
Gotcha.
At any rate, so what's interesting is we will eventually have an electrical contractor's labor shortage if we're not careful, because you have two people here, she's going to fly the labor around, but two people here that are highly dependent on trades to do all this retrofitting that we need to do. Now, this is a happy problem.
Yep.
This is a very good problem for the United States. It's distributed, good jobs, good pay, retrainable, so you can take someone contextually that wasn't doing it and you can retrain them into it. This is a wonderful problem to have. So we need to get ahead of that, and battery raw materials will take care of the rest. Auto manufacturers and companies like ChargePoint will take care of the rest. We just need to make sure that we don't stall in 5 to 10 year from now band when things are really going vertical on volumes. That's the thing I worry about, because you fall off a cliff really fast when you run out of labor or parts.
Great, thank you. Papia, let's just very briefly, you touched on aviation fuel and kind of where we are in terms of that being the largest source of emissions for United. Help us understand kind of the, in that sort of 5 to 10 year horizon that, Pasquale and also Rao are looking at, where are we in terms of what needs to be done, what really needs to happen, and, are you looking to Washington for that? Are you looking to Sacramento? Where's kind of the North Star on that?
Thank you. So definitely at the federal level in the Inflation Reduction Act, we were able to preserve the SAF tax credit. So that's great. And then, here in California, we actually had a bill that we tried to run to help support the production of SAF, but it was vetoed for a variety of reasons.
And SAF, I'm assuming sustainable aviation.
Yes,
fuel.
SAF is sustainable aviation fuel.
For those
Thank
of us,
you.
yes.
And so, when you look at what CARB is doing or has done in the past in various spaces like solar, that's what we want to do. And similarly with LCFS, low carbon fuel standards, with biodiesel, we really need to look at a tax credit type or some sort of an incentive based for that infrastructure investment. CARB is looking at doing that by the end of the decade. That's not soon enough. You don't need to mandate the airlines to use SAF. We are one of the only airlines that currently use it today out of LAX and SFO. We have a SAF blend that we utilize out of our LA operation, World Energy. That's a partner of ours. So how do we get more of it? That's the goal. And what is SAF, right? It's a lot of those talons and oils and biofuels used in diesel. But today, the way the economics work, it's better off to make biodiesel than it is to make the jet fuel that we need, the sustainable aviation fuel. So we have some work to do. I see some friends from the state that, we've talked to folks and want to continue that conversation, but we got to make it happen sooner. I think that's the way to come to fruition on this, to meet these goals that we have by 2035 and 2050.
That's great, thanks. And Rao, let's make sure we catch you, and then I'll turn to Tim and see if we can make sure to at least get one or two questions from the audience. I think just something that's very top of mind right now is, we've all been spending a lot of time at home. Things are starting to open up, but some version of work from home seems likely in our future. And I know View is in the process of scaling your residential business. what's the right way to think about sustainability and, you know, our home use as well, right? We know that the companies are making a lot of investments, but what does that mean for a renter or a homeowner?
Yeah, so when you think about both the infrastructure of buildings as well as our own life as humans, on the building side, they consume about 40% of all energy, almost 70% of all electricity, so they're incredibly consequential. And sometimes our homes have a bigger footprint, carbon footprint, than our offices per capita basis. So clearly, the same kind of things apply on energy efficiency and power generation with solar on the roof if you want to get to net zero. So most people here probably have solar on their roof. And then it's about, you know, lighting, where you reduce all the heat that came from the incandescent bulbs into LED in more efficient ways. At some point, you have to deal with the envelope. The windows and the walls bring in heat or not, and so you got to manage that effectively. So a smart window clearly makes a big difference there. On the health side, you know, we're an outdoor species. We're not supposed to be indoors. And shelter, by definition, is a disconnecting event. So there comes the conflict with our life and our evolution and what's going on. This room, by the way, if we spend all day here, we will go crazy. And that's not just a thing. It's real, and we're not made for indoors. And so when you're indoors, we're really lucky that we discovered this material called glass. As a material scientist, I think it's magical. It's a wall you can see through, and yet we've been covering them up with blinds. We turned it into a wall again. And it's funny, like we were installed in Google's new Manhattan headquarters, and they were going to go ahead with the regular glass, and then obviously they intersected and put smart windows in. They have 400 linear feet of the west side views of the river, the longest or widest sunset in New York, I'm told, this $2 billion building. They would be praying for cloudy days so they don't have to lose their view. Think about that, because the sun would be hitting that side of the building. So it's ridiculous what we've been doing, but as we learn more about our own biology, our physiology, our biochemistry, and our psychology, we're finding that exposure to natural light is important, breathing good air is important. The pandemic taught us that. Acoustics in an office environment, and of course, thermal comfort. You know, if your body's fighting, trying to maintain skin temperature, you don't have any cognitive, you know, power left. And so comfort matters. So I think exposure to light, certainly in our homes from a sustainability point of view, all the things you already see, you know, the products are available, now available with rebates in many cases from the utility or directly from the manufacturer. Basically, every building should be sustainable for us to get to the point of net zero.
Great, thank you. Well, I know we are at time, so we're gonna probably wrap it up there. But I think we heard some really interesting themes around, you know, the exciting work that the private sector is really the tip of the spear. Obviously, the financial investments that are coming from state and local governments are critical to help kind of keep building that momentum, making sure that we're not leaving any communities behind. But it's really exciting, and thank you all for sharing your perspectives about how some of these leading industries are really helping us to keep up that momentum and create a more sustainable future. So thank you.
Thank you.